If you are entering from one state to another state or one border to another border, you're supposed to pay the entry tax. Now they changed it. Now you are paying GST. Most of indirect taxes are subsumed or merged with GST, and for the entire India, we are imposing only one indirect tax, that is called GST. In GST, there is no tax on tax. We will not be collecting the tax on any kind of transaction. Hello everyone, I am Arun Kumar, lecturer in Department of Commerce and Management, Vidhyaashram First Grade College, the Temple of Excellence, MYSURU. Dear students, welcome to this session number 1 on unit number 1, that is Introduction to GST. Yes, dear students, in this particular chapter, we are going to study about the basic concepts of GST, how the GST came into existence, and what and all the different taxes we had earlier to GST, what is the types of GST we have, rates under GST, benefits, features under GST. About these concepts we are going to study in this particular session with respect to this unit number 1, that is Introduction to GST. So now if you look into the indirect tax structure in India, so India had several erstwhile indirect taxes such as service tax, value added tax called VAT, central excise, etc., which used to be levied at multiple supply chain stages. Yes, earlier to a GST. So at presently we have the indirect tax structure called GST, but earlier to GST we had n number of indirect taxes. Okay, we have only one indirect tax, that is called GST, but earlier to that we had n number of indirect taxes such as service, value added tax, central excise tax, wealth tax, luxury tax, and so on. So which is used to levied at multiple supply chain stages. Yes, so on the different supply chain stages, they used to impose the different types of indirect taxes. If they are imposing wealth tax and another stage of supply, they will be imposing some excise duty. Like that, in different supply chain, they used to impose different indirect taxes, but now they are imposing only one tax, that is called GST. So some taxes were governed by the state and some by the center. There was no unified and centralized tax on both goods and services. Yes, so if you look into this particular slide, you will get to know earlier to GST we had different indirect taxes where they used to levy the different indirect taxes on different supply chain link, and some taxes were governed by the state government and some taxes were governed by the central government. So it is not governed by one government, whether by the central or state. Few indirect taxes were governed by the central government or few indirect taxes were governed by the state government, and there was no centralized and unified tax on both goods and services. So earlier to GST, there was so many confusions with respect to what type of tax we are supposed to impose on a particular supply of goods or the services. So this was the scenario in India before the introduction of GST in the year 2007. So next, issues in indirect taxes. So what was happening? What was happening when the old indirect structure was in India? So in 2017, the goods and services tax GST replaced several state and central indirect taxes. Yes, as I said, this GST replaced several different types of indirect taxes of state and central government. Some of those taxes before GST were, yes, so few taxes which were there before introducing the GST in India, those taxes were VAT. VAT is nothing but value added tax. So if you are a manufacturing concern, you are supposed to pay the VAT on whatever the products you are going to manufacture. So this tax was there earlier to GST. And service tax, yes, if you are providing any services like hotel services or any kind of services, you are supposed to pay the tax under this particular service tax indirect tax system earlier to GST, but now you are paying only GST. Next, sales tax. If you are selling, if you are a seller, if you are a supplier, then you are supposed to pay the tax under sales tax, but now you are paying tax under GST. Next, entry tax. So if you are entering from one state to another state or one border to another border, you are supposed to pay the entry tax. Now they changed it. Now you are paying GST. Next, excise duty, tax, etc. So excise duty was there earlier also. Now also we have the excise duty on certain goods, not on every goods. On certain goods still we have the excise duty. For example, alcohol. Okay, on alcohol we are not imposing GST, we are imposing this excise duty. So levying GST eliminated the cascading effect of taxes on the Indian economy. So here you can see these are the different taxes what we had earlier to GST, and we used to pay the tax under different head of indirect taxes for different types of businesses what we were doing. But after introducing GST in the year of 2017, we are paying only one tax, that is called GST, on all types of transaction. Whether you are doing a business, or whether you are selling the product, or whether you are providing the services, whatever the business you will do, but you are paying one indirect tax, that is called GST. So this is the beauty of GST. And after introducing this GST, we can avoid the cascading effect. So what is this cascading effect? Cascading effect is nothing but tax on tax. So for example, when you are purchasing, you paid 100 rupees plus tax of 10 rupees. Total how much you paid? You paid 110 rupees. And you are selling this to somebody else, 110 rupees, again tax of 10 rupees. Total you are paying 120 rupees. Okay, the second party will be paying 120 rupees. Again 120 rupees, and tax on this 120 is 20. Let us say the total value is 140. So the third party is paying 140. So here we are not eliminating the tax which is paid earlier, right? We are not eliminating the tax which is paid earlier. So what is the tax here? We paid 10 rupees. What is the tax here? We paid 10 rupees. Here how much we paid? 20 rupees. Totally 40 rupees of tax we paid. That means here already tax is paid on this value, but again we are also paying here also in the second stage and also in the third stage. This is called cascading effect. That means tax on tax. We already paid the tax. Again we are paying the tax on the same product, including on the tax amount. So to avoid this cascading effect, this GST is going to help us. So that is the beauty of GST. So this is the issue what we had earlier. So we had cascading effect in the tax system, that is in the indirect tax system. So after introducing the GST and replacing all these indirect taxes by GST, so this cascading effect is eliminated and all the suppliers are getting benefited under this particular indirect tax scheme. So taxes subsumed under GST. So which are all the taxes which are subsumed by GST? So those taxes are central excise duty, duties of excise, additional duties of excise, additional duties of customs, specified additional custom duties, cess, state VAT, and central sales tax, purchase tax, luxury tax, entertainment tax, entry tax, taxes on advertisement, taxes on lotteries, betting and gambling. So these are the indirect taxes what we had earlier to GST. And under these different types of indirect taxes, we used to pay the tax to the government. And these all indirect taxes are subsumed under GST. Now it is totally called what? It is totally called GST. It is not called sales tax, and it is not called purchase tax, or it is not called luxury tax or entertainment tax or entry tax or taxes on advertisement. It is only called GST. So these are the taxes which are subsumed under the GST system. Next, what is GST? So now, so far you get to know what are the types of taxes we had earlier to GST and what was the problem we are facing with the earlier indirect tax system. That is the cascading effect. Mainly the main problem is cascading effect. So now if you look into GST, what is this GST? Why it came into existence? And what is the advantages of this GST and who will get benefited? Whether the customer will get benefited or the manufacturer will get benefited, or whether the government will get benefited or the middlemen will get benefited, that we have to know. Then only we can easily understand how this is going to beneficial to all the people who are involved in the business. So if you look into the meaning of GST, so the GST is known as Goods and Services Tax. Yes, GST full form is Goods and Services Tax. It is an indirect tax. Yes. So GST is nothing but it is a goods and services tax, and it is a indirect tax. Okay, it is a indirect tax. So what is this indirect tax? Indirect tax is nothing but the tax collected indirectly from the user of the product or the user of the services is called indirect tax. So you will not be knowing, okay, whether you are paying the tax or not. Only few people will be knowing they are paying the tax. For example, you go and purchase a t-shirt. You are paying 500 rupees, but that 500 rupees is inclusive of tax. You go and purchase toothpaste. That toothpaste you are paying 100 rupees. That 100 rupees is inclusive of tax. And you go and purchase a shampoo by paying 200 rupees. That 200 rupees is inclusive of tax. And you recharge your cell phone. For example, you recharge your cell phone with 599 rupees, plan. So that 599 rupees is inclusive of tax because of you are using that services. So whatever you go and purchase, whether the goods or the services, you will be paying the tax on those goods and services for using those goods and services. That is why it is called indirect tax. That means the tax indirectly collected from the user of the product. So if you are purchasing the t-shirt, you will be using it. If you are purchasing the toothpaste, you will be using it, or your family members will be using it. So that is why the final user of the product is liable to pay the tax to the government, the indirect tax, and you are paying the indirect tax to the government. So GST is nothing but goods and services tax, and it is a indirect tax which has replaced many indirect taxes in India. Yes, it is replaced many indirect taxes in India which were there earlier to this GST. Those indirect taxes are, as we already discussed, excise duty, VAT, service tax, etc. The Goods and Service Tax Act was passed in the Parliament on 29th March 2017. Yes, this GST Act is passed in the year 2017 on 29th March and came into effect on 1st July 2017. This act is passed on 29th March 2017 and came into existence from 1st July 2017. So that is why we always called GST Act 2017. And goods and services tax is levied on the supply of goods and services. Yes, this GST is levied on what? It is levied on goods and services. If you are selling the goods, then GST is applicable. If you are selling the services, then GST is applicable. If you are purchasing the goods, GST is applicable. If you are purchasing the services, yes, obviously GST is applicable. So this goods and services tax is levied on the goods and services. Goods and services tax law in India is a comprehensive multi-stage destination based tax that is levied on every value addition. Yes, GST is a multi-stage and destination based tax. So GST is a comprehensive multi-stage and destination based tax. That means the purchaser of the product is liable to pay the tax, right? The destination based is nothing but the purchaser of the product, where the product reaches at the last, there the liability will arise. That person is liable to pay the tax to the government. That is why it is called destination based tax. If you are in Karnataka and if you are selling goods to Tamil Nadu, so what will happen? You are not paying the tax, just you are selling the goods to the person and you are collecting the amount. The person who is purchasing in Tamil Nadu, that is the destiny, right? Where the product go and reach. So that person is liable to pay tax to the government. That is why this GST is called destination based tax. And GST is a single domestic indirect tax law for the entire country. Yes, for the entire country we have one indirect tax, that is called GST. We don't have any other indirect taxes except GST in India. As obviously we have excise duty, but most of indirect taxes are subsumed or merged with GST, and for the entire India we are imposing only one indirect tax, that is called GST. Got it? So this is the meaning of GST and the history of GST when it came into existence. And moving on, the types of GST. Yes, what are types of GST we have? Mainly we have four types, that is CGST, SGST, IGST and UTGST. So what is this CGST? CGST is nothing but Central goods and services tax. So central goods and services tax. And what is SGST? State goods and services tax. Okay, the central goods and services tax, that is CGST. SGST, state goods and services tax. IGST, it is nothing but integrated. IGST, integrated goods and services tax. Integrated goods and services tax. UTGST is nothing but Union Territory goods and services tax. So these are the four different types of GSTs what we have. So GST is one indirect tax. Under that GST we have four types, that is CGST, SGST, IGST and UTGST. Next, tax rates under GST. So what are the tax rates under GST? So we have four-tier tax rate, that is 5%, 12%, 18% and 28%. Yes, mainly we have four rates under GST. Those four rates are 5%, 12%, 18% and 28%. These are the rates under GST. So how this different types of taxes are applicable? So we have four types of GST, right? So how we are going to collect the tax? How we are going to impose that particular tax? For example, if you are doing the business within India, okay, if both the buyer and seller are within the state, okay, if the buyer and the seller are within state, then what GST is applicable? Yes, it is CGST and SGST is applicable. So if the buyer and the seller, are within the state, then the CGST and SGST is applicable. For example, if the tax rate is 12%, what you will do? You collect 6% CGST, 6% SGST. If tax percent is 18%, you collect 9% CGST and 9% SGST. In case if the tax rate is 28%, what you will do? You will collect 14% CGST, 14% SGST. So here, if any transaction is happening within the state, if both the seller and the buyer are in the same state, then CGST and SGST is applicable. In case if the parties are between two states, okay, if the buyer and seller are in different states, okay, if they are in different states, if the buyer and the seller are in different states, then IGST is applicable. So which tax is applicable? IGST is applicable. In case if the buyer and the seller are within the state, CGST, SGST is applicable. If the buyer and the seller are in different states, then IGST is applicable. And if any union territory is selling the products to other state or within the state, okay, if any union territory is selling the products within the state, what tax is applicable? Yes, for union territories, if they are transacting within the state, then they are supposed to collect UTGST and CGST. They are supposed to collect UTGST and CGST. They are supposed to collect. Next, moving further, features of GST. Features of GST. Subsuming of 17 taxes at central and state level. Yes, we subsumed, we merged or we replaced 17 different types of indirect taxes into one indirect tax, that is called GST. So that is the first feature of GST. That is, we subsumed all 17 types of indirect taxes which comes under the central and the state government. Next, consumption based tax. Yes, GST is a consumption based tax. So what is this consumption based tax? So consumption based tax is nothing but the person who consumes the product or the person who uses the services, that person is called, or that person is liable to pay the tax to the government. So that is why in the last slide, while I'm explaining the meaning of GST, just I had used the word called destination based tax. That means whoever the person who is utilizing the services or whoever the person who is purchasing the product is liable to pay the tax to the government. That is why GST is called consumption based tax. That is also one of the feature of GST. One tax rate across the country. Yes, the one more beautiful feature of GST is one tax rate across the country. So if 5% is applicable on a particular product in Karnataka, same rate of tax is applicable all over the India. Okay. For example, if 12% of tax is applicable on a t-shirt, on a particular t-shirt, the same rate of tax is applicable on the t-shirt in all over the country. They will not change the rate of tax on that particular product. If they are charging 12%, they will charge 12%. If they are charging 28%, they will charge 28%. So one country, one tax. So in the same way, one tax rate across the country. Next, taxable event, supply of goods or services. So when this taxable event will arise, okay, when this tax incidence will arise. So when the goods and services are supplied, then the tax event will arise. Then we are going to collect the tax, or we impose the tax, then we collect the tax from the buyer of the product. Only when the goods and services are supplied, then the taxable event will arise, not in any other situations. Next, no differentiation in goods or services. Yes, we are not going to make any differentiation while we are imposing the tax on goods and services. Whatever the rules and regulations are there according to the GST Act, as per that we will be collecting the tax on the goods and services and we will not differentiate on it. Next, comprehensive tax on goods and services. Yes, we will be imposing the comprehensive tax on goods and services. Sometime we will be imposing CGST, SGST. Sometime we will be imposing IGST, and sometime we will be imposing UTGST and CGST. Next, no tax on tax. Yes, it is like avoiding of cascading effect. So here in GST, there is no tax on tax. We will not be collecting the tax on any kind of transaction. Okay, just we will be collecting the tax only on once. Okay, only once we will be collecting the tax, not on every time or on every stage of transferring the goods from the manufacturer till the buyer or the consumer of the product. So once the tax is paid in one stage of transferring the goods from the manufacturer to the consumer, then that's the last the tax what we are paying. We will not be imposing the tax on tax in the middle of the supply chain. Next, free flow of credit. Yes, free flow of credit with respect to input tax credit. So the manufacturer will be getting the benefit of input tax credit. So they will get the free flow of credit and they can easily claim the credit of tax. And value addition tax at each stage. Yes, at each stage of manufacturing the product or each stage of transferring the goods, some value will be added to the product, and at the same time some rate of tax will be added to the product. So these are all the features of GST. Moving further, advantages of GST. So what and all the advantages we have under GST? So the first advantage is removing the cascading effect of tax. So yes, as I discussed in the previous slide, it is going to avoid the cascading effect. So cascading effect is nothing but tax on tax. So GST is going to avoid this tax on tax. Next, higher threshold for GST registration. Yes, it is not like everyone is compulsorily supposed to register with the GST authority. Okay, everyone is supposed to register with the GST authority. Whether you are a small businessman or you are a large businessman or whatever the kind of business you are running, based on the threshold limit, based on the turnover, you are supposed to register. If your turnover is less than the threshold limit, then you are not supposed to register or you are not compulsorily registered. Okay, so higher threshold limit for GST registration. So only if the turnover crosses some limit of rupees 40 lakhs, then you are compulsorily supposed to register with the GST authority. If your turnover not crosses 40 lakhs in any financial year, then you need not to register with the GST authority. So we have the higher threshold limit, that is rupees 40 lakhs is the turnover. Next, composition scheme for small businesses. So earlier to GST, in the earlier indirect tax structure, we didn't had this kind of composition scheme. Here in GST, we have composition scheme. That means if any particular business entity whose turnover is less than 1 crore, if their turnover is less than 1 crore, then obviously they can opt for composition scheme. They can opt for composition scheme where a fixed rate of GST will be collected or imposed on the turnover. Next, simpler online facilities for GST registration or GST compliance. Yes, for each and everything from the registration till paying the tax to the government, we all have the simple the online procedure where you will be going to upload all your details with the GST portal, and it is visible to each and every person. You don't have to go and beg any officers like that. Just by doing all your transaction through online, it is very easy and very informative and very quick for the business entities, and relatively lesser compliance under GST. Yes, earlier to GST, the tax structure or the different types of indirect taxes what we had, we used to get very confusions. We used to get lot of confusions. But here under GST, lesser compliances, we don't get that much confused, right? We will not get that much confused because under GST we have all simple forms. Next, defined treatment for e-commerce activities. Yes, for e-commerce activities, they have a proper structure of tax collecting system. So whatever the rules and regulations are prescribed by the GST, if you follow that, then easily you can follow the rules and regulations and easily you can pay the tax to the government. That is why defined treatment for e-commerce activities. Next, increased efficiency in logistic. Yes, earlier we used to carry so many invoices or so many information with respect to the transfer of goods from one place to another place. But now once if the GST is paid and if you have that one invoice with you, you can carry the goods from any place to any place, from any place of India to wherever you require to deliver the goods. So wherever they ask you for the document, if you show that invoice, then that is enough. You do not have to pay any other tax, or you do not have to be in a confusion about what you're supposed to do. Next, regulating the unorganized sectors. Yes, regulating of unorganized sector is also one of the advantage for GST. So earlier to GST, most of the business entities were not registered with the government, but after introducing the GST, most of the business entities are registered under the GST authority and all of them are paying the tax to the government. So these are all the advantages of GST, and with this I'm going to wind up this session. I'll come up with few more new topics in the upcoming session. Until then, thank you all. Have a nice day. Namaste.